Today, we'll be discussing the case of Elaine Foo. For many years, Elaine worked as a very successful banker. She climbed her way up from entry-level positions to some of the top positions in her field. But despite her success in her career, almost every day at work, Elaine was facing a major issue, one that she had in fact faced since she was a child. She was self-conscious about her height, and to make matters worse, she was facing harassment at work because of it. After hearing about something called leg lengthening surgery, Elaine decided it would be best if she got this operation done. But while she hoped doing this would allow her to achieve the height she wanted, it was just weeks into her recovery when everything went terribly wrong. There was a very serious malfunction in the device used to lengthen Elaine's leg. And this would not only leave her in severe pain, but this would leave her with legs so uneven. Other parts of her body began to face major issues. This botched procedure would eventually lead to a major lawsuit, and the court would be left trying to figure out if this were a case of negligence or if it were a surgery gone wrong. But just to introduce myself, my name is Petal Palmer, and on this channel I post anything medical, mysteries, and crime. If that is something that sounds interesting to you, please consider subscribing if you end up liking this video. But before we get into this case, I'd like to take a minute to get into the sponsor of today's video, Beam. Now, I really like hot chocolate, and I'm always on the hunt to find ways to feel better before or after sleeping. So I was very intrigued when Beam reached out. Dream by Beam is a nighttime hot cocoa blend aimed at hopefully improving one's sleep. It's packed with a bunch of natural ingredients including melatonin, magnesium, L-theanine, and reishi mushrooms, which have been cited for their benefits in supporting all 4 stages of sleep. And you know, I'm always one for the numbers, so I thought it was really cool that in 6 weeks, Beam found that 93% of participants reported having better sleep after using it. They have many flavors. I really like the brownie batter flavor, and I do feel like I felt more chilled before going to sleep when using it. If you'd like to try it out for yourself to prioritize your sleep for a productive and healthy year, please use code PETAL to get 35% off Dream by Beam at checkout. Of course, be sure to read the disclaimer on Beam's website as shown above before trying. My link for the 35% off will be in the description. Again, thank you Beam for sponsoring this video. Now let's get into this case. Elaine Foo was born in Malaysia sometime around 1975. Not too much is publicly available about her upbringing, but from what is available, Elaine seemed to be destined for great things, especially coming into her young adult years. Growing up, Elaine did gymnastics, and eventually she headed to the US, attending Harvard University. She studied at Harvard from 1993 to 1998 and graduated cum laude with a bachelor's in economics. During these years, Elaine had worked at 2 different notable companies, Lehman Brothers in Chicago and McKinsey & Company in London, England. In the years after her graduation, Elaine worked at several other financial and money management jobs. And for 4 years, she even worked as the CEO of an online live dealer gambling company called Stanley Ho Online Gambling in New York. In 2005, she was once again in Europe working as a managing director at Gem Capital in Paris, France. And 1 year later, she became the head of sales for France and Northern Africa at the Bank of America Merrill Lynch in London. She remained at the Merrill Lynch branch of the Bank of America for many years, climbing her way up the ladder and taking on different positions within the bank, which, by the way, is no easy feat. The Bank of America, especially in the region of London, is quite a big deal, especially since right behind New York City, London is ranked number 2 on the Global Financial Centers Index, which is an index that ranks the competitiveness of financial centers around the world. So, making her way up the ladder was a very good accomplishment, and her successful career was very much in full swing. But despite her being extremely successful and good at what she was doing, Elaine was facing a major issue at work because she unfortunately was subjected to inappropriate comments about her appearance. Elaine, now in her 40s, was 5 feet and 2 inches tall. This is only just below the average height of women in the UK, Guichet of 5 foot 3 inches. But still, Elaine described that she was self-conscious about her height and that she felt, quote, stocky in a bikini, and she explained that she was frequently picked on at work because of her height. Elaine described to Jonathan Ames at the Times, quote, the senior men thought that I was the intern. The standard comment when I came into meetings was, coffee, 1 sugar. I got fed up with wearing very high heels. I was desperate to wear flat shoes. Elaine shared to Tom Bradda with the BBC that she was actually taller than most of her female peers at age 12, but it was after this when she quickly stopped growing. And at age 14, that was when she began to realize that she was shorter than everyone else. Elaine later explained that she believed that she had body dysmorphia. This is, quote, a mental condition in which you can't stop thinking about one or more perceived defects or flaws in your appearance, and one that, quote, disrupts how you see and feel about your own body and appearance. And she further described that hearing comments like this only contributed to the insecurities she had regarding her height, which definitely isn't unheard of because it's not uncommon for people who are short to face discrimination based on their height. Studies have shown that humans tend to associate a taller height with more positive attributes, whereas they associate shorter heights with negative ones. The magnitude of this relationship between height and various characteristics has been shown to be significantly stronger for men, but still nonetheless it holds true for both men and women. A 2006 study by Dr. Frederick et al. Found that out of 52,677 adults, only 26% of shorter men were satisfied with their height compared to 87% of taller men. And this was in comparison to the 41% of short women versus the 82% of tall women that were satisfied. One study has also shown that male height was positively associated with perceived dominance, health, and intelligence, whereas female height was positively associated with perceived intelligence. Now, despite the bullying, Elaine actually described that most of her time at the Merrill Lynch was wonderful, further explaining that most of the harassment came from, quote, one bad boss. But nonetheless, she still was self-conscious of her height, with her stating, quote, when I started working in the Western world, everyone else towered over me. So this, and likely paired with already standing out being a woman of color in a male-dominated field, definitely further exacerbated how self-conscious she felt about her height. When Elaine was 25, she saw something that caught her attention because she came across an article that mentioned leg lengthening. In this article, she read about a Chinese clinic using an external frame to lengthen bones, and this was the first time she'd ever heard of limb lengthening surgeries. Limb lengthening surgeries are operations in which a bone of the arms or legs, such as the humerus, tibia, femur, etc., are broken and devices are introduced to the area to lengthen the bone, thus lengthening your arm or leg. Online, especially on YouTube, you may have come across various different videos documenting the experience of patients receiving limb lengthening surgery of their legs. In some of these videos, you can find the progression of the patients going to an orthopedic surgeon with their pre-op height and comparing it to their post-op height. While limb lengthening surgeries more commonly are seen in the media for cosmetic reasons, they didn't always start that way. Limb lengthening surgeries were initially created as an operation for medical or orthopedic purposes. For example, this includes cases such as limb length discrepancy, or LLD, where somebody has one leg that's longer than the other, prompting them to get surgery so they could be the same length. LLD can be something someone's born with, but it can also be caused from certain health conditions, diseases, infections, or even injuries. And for a while, surgeons have used limb lengthening surgeries to correct this. It was just that once surgeons figured that they can do these procedures for cosmetic reasons as well, this eventually became a new reality. With limb lengthening surgeries, there are 3 phases. One, surgery, also known as osteotomy, is when the bone is purposefully broken in 2. So this is a horizontal cut. And then after this cut, a device is placed either vertically inside the bone or on the outside of the limb in order to cause the lengthening. lengthening. For a device placed inside the bone, this would refer to an internal fixator, whereas a device placed outside of the limb refers to an external fixator. The second phase is called distraction, which is also known as the lengthening phase. This starts about 1 week after the surgery, and this is when that very device that they attach to the limb or inside pulls the bone apart about 1 millimeters a day for about 2 months. And then the last phase is called the consolidation phase, also known as the healing phase. And this is when the new bone growth hardens and all the nerves, muscles, and tendons around it adjust to the new length. This consolidation phase typically lasts for about 2 to 3 months. Bone growth is a key part of the limb lengthening operation, as the entire goal is to be able to remove whatever device is spreading the broken bone apart and have the bone support itself again, which in the case of load-bearing bones such as the femur, which is your thigh bone, and the tibia, which is your shin bone, is truly a must. Once consolidation is over, the surgeon would then remove the lengthening device, whether that be an internal rod or an external fixator. And then for those using an external device, the patient may be given a cast or a brace to use for about 3 to 4 weeks. With an internal device, however, depending on the condition being treated, a cast or brace may or may not even be needed. When Elaine initially came across the article, it did sound intriguing. However, after further reading the article and seeing that this procedure came with questionable looking older equipment at the time, and it came also with a risk of serious infection, she didn't think it'd be something she'd actually go forward with. But nonetheless, she still remained interested in it as she got older, describing, quote, "I know people will question the vanity of it, but when you face body dysmorphia, there's no rational explanation for why you feel so overwhelmingly bad." And it was eventually 16 years later when this interest turned into a reality for her. One day, sometime during or before July 2016, at the age of 41, Elaine discovered a clinic in London that was offering leg lengthening services. This clinic was named by a man named Dr. Jean-Marc Guichet, a, quote, leading specialist in limb lengthening. Dr. Guichet began his work in Italy, setting up a clinic there before opening up clinics abroad, specifically 3 in London. And notably, he trademarked his own lengthening device called the Guichet nail, inspired by an earlier device he also made called the Albizia nail. While cosmetically this might appear to be something of more recent times, the history of limb lengthening surgery goes back much further than many people might actually think. Before limb lengthening, intramedullary devices were initially and are still used to stabilize a fractured bone. The medullary cavity is the hollow part of the bone that contains bone marrow. So an intramedullary device is essentially a device inside the medullary cavity. Researchers have attested that the first intramedullary device was used in Egypt about 3,500 years ago in approximately 1500 BC. This nail was seen in a 1995 X-ray of a mummy named User Montu. It was determined that this was in fact inserted post-mortem to preserve the body's structure. However, it would be in 1524 when anthropologists would report the first intramedullary nailing procedure to stabilize a broken bone performed by surgeons in Mexico. And it would be in the mid-1800s when the first medical journals would report intramedullary nailing. In 1847, the Rizzoli Institute of Bologna, Italy, actually made reports of studies where they equalized the lengths of people's legs, not by lengthening, but by actually shortening the leg that was at the normal length. Skeletal traction is defined as, quote, a system where a combination of pulleys, pins, and weights are used to promote the healing of fractured bones. And the first person to describe skeletal traction with the intent to lengthen a limb was a man named Dr. Alessandro Codivilla of Bologna, who actually eventually became the director of the Rizzoli Institute. For the next several years, many more developments would be made regarding limb lengthening. This involved work from doctors from around the world, including Dr. Vittorio Pucci of Italy, who introduced a gradual traction method, and Dr. Leroy Abbott of the States, who eventually in 1932 performed the first ever limb lengthening procedure using skeletal traction at the Shriners Children's Hospital in St. Louis, Missouri. Before they had external fixators and even internal fixators, surgeons were using skeletal traction to lengthen bones. However, it was finally in 1951 when Soviet physician Dr. Gavril Ilazarov created the world's first external fixator for limb lengthening. Initially, Dr. Ilazarov was labeled a quack for this invention, but after seeing his success with the device, he and the external lengthening method quickly gained popularity, with people even naming him, quote, the magician from Kurgan. He created circular external fixators, and later on in the 70s and 80s, Dr. Heinz Wagner created the monolateral external fixator. By the 1980s, limb lengthening had made its way from the orthopedic world into the cosmetic world, despite Dr. Ilazarov stating that cosmetic limb lengthening was never his intention. And it was finally in 1983 when the next major breakthrough came, when Dr. Alexander Ivanovich Bliskanov created the first practical intramedullary nail to lengthen limbs. Soon followed in the 80s, 90s was an electronically motorized device called the flip bone, officially launched in 1997 by Dr. Rainer Baumgart. And also followed was the Albizia nail, which eventually led to the Guichet nail created by Dr. Guichet, as mentioned. The Guichet nail lengthens the bone through a ratcheting mechanism, meaning to lengthen the limb, the patient must twist their leg in a certain way a few times daily while using the device. In more modern times came the magnet-operated precise nail, developed by Drs. Standard, Herzenberg, and Green, which was FDA approved in 2011. And all three of these devices, amongst others, are still used today. Elaine did her research into the operation. She researched different physicians and she made sure she had a thorough understanding before going on with something like this. By 2024, Dr. Guichet estimated that he'd done nearly 800 femoral lengthening surgeries in his career. According to the Guichet Institute website, the preoperative period is critical to the success of the surgery. The guide on the site states that those planning to undergo the operation will need to undergo a pre-op training regimen to ensure their bodies are ready and that their muscles will be able to accommodate the change in bone length. Not just this, but patients must also undergo a psychological evaluation, especially as there will be a notable shift in body image post-op. This evaluation is meant to ensure that they're certain they truly want the operation done and that they will be able to handle any potential emotional fallout. Elaine decided that Dr. Guichet would be a great pick because not only did he have experience, but she thought that he would be reliable because he charged a lot for his services, according to her. Elaine was going to be paying around £50,000 for this operation, which is about $63,000 US. According to Brada from the BBC article, the price for these operations ranged between £15,000 to up to £150,000. And because she was going somewhere expensive, Elaine figured she would be safe. She described, quote, Dr. Guichet was open about the kinds of things that could go wrong. Nerve injuries, blood clots, the possibility of bones not fusing back together. But I'd done my research, was going to a very expensive doctor, and I expected commensurate medical care. Bones are filled with marrow, veins, and nerves that are delicate and provide important function to the body. Common risks for limb lengthening surgeries include nerve damage, muscle damage, blood flow issues, marrow issues, issues with bone growth and density, and misaligned bone growth. All of these are potentially lifelong issues or issues that are costly and painful to fix. If the bone were to grow back with low density, this leaves the patient more susceptible to fractures. There are also some general risks that come with any surgery that one does, primarily being infection. And as we will find out with this case, there are also risks of malfunctions of the implanted device. Elaine was told about the complications. She got all the pre-op requirements completed, and very soon it was time for her to go to the clinic to get this procedure done. On Monday, July 25th, 2016, Elaine headed to one of the London locations of Dr. Guichet's clinic, and it was this very day when she underwent the surgery to get her femurs lengthened. Elaine's goal was to raise her height from 5'2" to 5'5" inches. As predicted under the operation section of the Guichet Institute site, this operation lasted or should have lasted around 5 hours. To get started, they made small incisions on top of her femurs. Making these incisions allowed them to insert an intramedullary saw into the bone to be able to cut the bone from the inside, causing less scarring to the tissues around it. They then inserted the Guichet nail through this same opening, and they secured the nail by using 3 other nails, a larger one through the top of the bone and 2 smaller ones near the bottom of the bone. When Elaine first woke up after her surgery, she was feeling well. She had no pain, and she rather was excited with the fact that it felt almost as if she had done nothing. However, this excitement and lack of pain unfortunately didn't last for too long, because it was very shortly later when Elaine began experiencing some serious post-op complications. Just within 90 minutes of waking up, Elaine was in excruciating pain. She described, quote, "It felt like someone was cooking my legs, like being roasted from the inside." Post-op pain is something that is expected after doing a procedure, especially one as complex as this one. But for the rest of the day, Elaine was hurting so bad that she was unable to even sleep at night because of how much pain she was in. In order for this procedure to work, Elaine was required to do a few different exercises daily to ensure the rod did its intended job. Specifically, she was expected to twist or rotate her legs a few times a day so that she could trigger the ratchet mechanism of the rod, in turn allowing the nail to lengthen and make the gap a little larger. Despite the notable amount of pain she was experiencing during this time, Elaine did these movements as recommended. For 2 weeks straight, she would make sure to twist her leg every so often throughout the day, and she remained committed to the recovery process even through the pain. However, there was one day in particular when her pain took a drastic turn from being bad to being absolutely horrific. Elaine was experiencing post-op pain in both her legs. However, her left leg in particular was very painful. One night, just around 2 weeks after the operation, Elaine was simply in bed, just moving around, when suddenly something very alarming happened. Elaine described, quote, "I'd been feeling a lot of pain in my left leg. Then one night while I was moving around in bed, I heard what sounded like a Kit Kat crunch, followed by severe pain." Elaine soon contacted Dr. Guichet, and very shortly after, she went in to complete an x-ray to see what was going on. It was after the results came back when they made a startling discovery, described as one of Elaine's worst fears. The Guichet nail in her left leg had broken off, and it had split through her bone just like a splinter. This was very concerning because not only was the bone at risk for further damage, but now the device was also ineffective. Elaine rightfully was very worried about this, but Dr. Guichet tried reassuring her and told her that they would let the bone heal, and then once they did, they'll get the process started back up again. Their plan was to allow Elaine's right leg to continue growing, while on the other hand, for her left leg, they were going to have her wait for the bone to heal, only for them to start the process over again, attempting to catch up to the length of the right leg. Elaine was told that this next operation was going to cost thousands of pounds. However, at that point, as long as it was going to be fixing her leg, she was all for getting it paid and done. By September of 2016, Elaine's right leg was looking really good. It was about 7 centimeters or 2.5 inches longer. And with this, her right leg was at its target growth for the time. Her left leg, on the other hand, was not. And this was soon causing some serious problems for her. With how uneven her legs were, with the left leg being short and the right leg being tall, Elaine had to stand in a very uncomfortable way. She would have her right hip out and her spine would be very curved. And this led her to being in constant pain on top of the pain she was already experiencing in her legs. She was told to keep lengthening her right leg. And the plan was to just follow up when the time comes so they could do further evaluation. But while at first her right leg seemed to be doing fine, it wasn't too long after when she began experiencing some problems with her right leg as well. 6 weeks later in November, Elaine went in for some scans, and they found that now her right femur wasn't regrowing as it should have, because rather there was now a gap in her right femur, creating two pieces of the bone. And the only thing holding these two pieces together was the metal rod. When Elaine spoke to Dr. Guichet about this, he was like, you know what? I'm going to schedule you for an appointment at my clinic in Milan. This will be in a few months, and it should hopefully help in getting your recovery back in order. He scheduled for Elaine to have an operation done at the Milan clinic in April 2017. During this operation, they not only restarted the lengthening process of Elaine's left leg, but they also injected bone marrow into her right leg to try to stimulate more bone growth as the rod had hollowed it out. But while this operation should have been what hopefully helped Elaine, even after doing this, many more issues still arose. When Elaine woke up from the operation, she was approached by Dr. Guichet, and he told her that while he was taking the nail out during the operation, the nail had actually broke. On the bright side, he did have an extra nail, which was left over from another patient that he was able to use. On the downside, this was going to just cost her even more money. For the next 3 days in Milan, as Elaine tried her best to recover, she was in pain so intense that she was barely even able to move. And when she was able to, she ended up getting her stuff together and headed back to London because being in Milan any longer was no longer comfortable for her for various reasons. Initially, Elaine was told to recover in her Milan hotel room for 1 week, but she left just after 3 days, describing to Ames with the Times, quote, "I had to recover by myself and I was bleeding in the bed. I couldn't move. I had to urinate into a cup and I was terrified that I would be kicked out of the hotel. After 3 days, I decided to run back to London and was taken in a wheelchair to the airport. When Elaine arrived back in London, she immediately went to A&E, which is the emergency room. And she had described that the NHS or hospital staff were initially dismissive of what she was going through, with her describing their view as, quote, "As it was cosmetic surgery, if you pay for it, you have to accept the consequences." After returning to London, Elaine described that the communication and further discussions she had with Dr. Guichet kind of became sour. And as the next couple of months went by, she felt as though the doctor-patient relationship between the two had kind of crumbled apart. This wasn't good because Elaine was still dealing with serious complications from the procedure, and she was hoping to be able to find a physician who would be able to help her with getting these issues fixed. Finally, in July 2017, Elaine sought out help from an orthopedic specialist surgeon from the NHS. This surgeon fortunately did sympathize with what she was going through, and they performed 2 operations at the hospital, which for the most part fixed the issues that were happening with her legs. And after examining her, this specialist told her that this treatment process was not going to be short. It was going to be a long road before she was able to fully heal. In fact, it was looking to be at least 5 years of Elaine doing treatments before the healing process would be done. Describing the next 3 years, Elaine stated, quote, "From 2017 to 2020, I was single, unemployed, penniless, and disabled." She spent those next 3 years secluded from the world as she did various treatments attempting to recover. When finally in 2020, Elaine decided it was time to take action, and she ended up filing a lawsuit against Dr. Guichet seeking over £1 million in damages for both the botched operation and the traumatic aftermath. After the several years of treatment, while Elaine technically was able to heal from the operation, she was still left with heavy physical and emotional scarring that she had to work on recovering from. Not only did she have various mobility issues, but she also mentioned that she suffered from PTSD from everything that's happened. Regarding Elaine's claims in court, Dr. Guichet's lawyer claimed that there was no negligence on the part of the physician, stating that the complications were things that were warned of beforehand, and that rather one of the reasons the bone in her right leg hadn't been growing as planned was because not only did she apparently not disclose that she was using antidepressants, but also because she tried to apparently extend her right leg longer than they discussed. He stated, quote, Dr. Guichet's case is that there was no negligence, that the fracture and delayed bone healing were unfortunate, non-negligent complications that Ms. Foo was warned of before surgery, and that the limited right side bone regeneration was aggravated by Ms. Foo's undisclosed use of antidepressants and by her deliberately extending the nail in her right leg beyond the agreed length. Dr. Guichet's lawyer went on to further describe how Elaine was advised to partake in rehabilitation and physiotherapy. However, he stated that she neglected doing this, further describing how she also, quote, frequently declined advice that was given by Dr. Guichet. Elaine disputed these claims, stating that the antidepressants had nothing to do with the complications she was dealing with regarding the surgery, and maintaining her stance that complications arose mainly from the negligence of the physician. Regarding antidepressants, studies have reported an association between antidepressants and risk of bone loss, especially through long-term use of SSRIs, which is why Dr. Guichet's lawyer pointed out that Elaine apparently hadn't disclosed that she'd been using antidepressants, as that might have played a role in the bone not growing as much or as quickly as it should have, according to them. Likewise, Dr. Guichet claimed that Elaine misrepresented the facts of the situation, with him telling Tom Bratta with the BBC, quote, Ms. Foo's account is a gross misrepresentation of the facts, which I wholeheartedly reject. Over the past 35 years, I have successfully performed this surgery almost 800 times, immeasurably improving the lives of hundreds of patients. The well-being of my patients is always my priority, and I am in close contact with patients and their families to support them throughout their recovery. Finally, after a 4-year legal battle and 8 years since dealing with all of these complications, in July 2024, Elaine and Dr. Guichet agreed to settle out of court. This settlement entailed Elaine receiving a substantial sum of money and also entailed neither side admitting to fault. When the settlement was agreed upon, Elaine described herself as satisfied with the outcome, and overall expressing her feelings with the whole situation, Elaine described, quote, I lost the best years of my life. I know people like to hear the word regret, and if someone asked me today, would you have done it if you knew you were going to go through all this? I would say a definite no, thank you very much. Because of the concerning risks that can come with limb lengthening, it is, to say the least, a much less popular cosmetic procedure than others in the industry. A 2023 article by Uwa Idi Osifo and Lauren Wilson with the NBC discussed the growing trend in cosmetic limb lengthening surgeries in the United States, significantly shown amongst men. In this article, a California-based surgeon named Dr. Shahab Mahboubian claimed that just in 2023 alone, he was scheduled to complete over 50 limb lengthening surgeries, and he further stated that this was actually the most he's ever booked in a year ever. A 2023 study by Petal et al. Explored a database of limb lengthening surgeries done in 7 states in the US between 2005 and 2015. They assessed a total of 2,563 limb lengthening surgeries for the study. And they found that in 2011, around the same time that the precise nail was introduced, there was actually a steep increase in internal lengthening surgeries and a decrease in external lengthening surgeries. Over the course of those 10 years, femur lengthening surgeries increased by up to 10.2% each year, and tibia lengthening surgeries increased by up to 4.9% each year. A 2020 article by Tom Bratta covering 2 men who had gotten leg lengthening procedures states, quote, "At leading centers in the US, Germany, and South Korea, the procedure is carried out between 100 and 200 times a year. Others, including in Spain, India, Turkey, and Italy, perform between 20 and 40 operations a year. In the UK, the figure is slightly lower, about 15 times a year. Almost every clinic the BBC spoke to noticed an increase year on year." One might ask, how often do limb lengthening surgeries fail? Or how often do these operations end up badly and in need of correction? In cases of medically required lengthening, the more drastic the correction, the more room there is for severe complications that require further surgery. But in general, these operations may fail for various reasons, with the main factors being the device, the reason for the operation, and the post-op care. With many new devices in recent decades, there are varying answers regarding the complication rate of this operation. In 1998, Nadi et al. Did a study in children who received medically necessary limb lengthening surgeries. This study focused on safety in regards to the Elazarev method in children with underlying bone issues. It found that the rate of complication was directly related to the bone health and underlying conditions of the children. As of more recent times, a 2020 study by Professor Gamal Hosni looked at the complication rates of various different limb lengthening methods. They found the lowest complication rate to be 12.1% from an external fixator called the Taylor Spatial Frame, or TSF. And the highest was 83.6% from the Elazarev external fixator, or IEF. The length of these studies were 16 years and 14 years respectively. Limb lengthening related lawsuits are not unheard of, but they're not nearly as common as one might think. The Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, England is a well-rated children's hospital that has had the trust of the local community for many centuries. However, this trust was shaken when the cases of 721 young patients were put under urgent review in 2024. The investigation centers around a man named Dr. Yasser Jabbar. Dr. Jabbar is an orthopedic surgeon who, amongst many other surgeries, performed limb lengthening operations for children who medically required them. However, in a report from Sean Lintern with The Times, they stated, quote, "Of the 37 cases that have been reviewed already, 22 children have been found to have come to some degree of harm, 13 of them classed as severe harm that is likely to include lifelong injuries." They found that the operations by Dr. Jabbar had issues including legs of different lengths by up to 27 meters difference, post-operative chronic pain, muscle damage, nerve damage, permanent deformities, and complications so severe it actually required a leg to be amputated. This child whose leg had to be amputated was a 6-year-old girl named Bunty Stallam. Bunty was born with a rare bone disease, and after seeing Dr. Jabbar, according to her father, Dean Stallam, she was subjected to an array of, quote, "unnecessary and traumatic operations" over the course of 15 months. Staff members who had worked with Dr. Jabbar noted that he was frequently aggressive and threatening towards staff, and The Times reported that the hospital staff didn't act on the words of the families or even the whistleblowers amongst their own staff regarding Dr. Jabbar, allowing him to continue his practice. Bunty is just one of the many patients named in the complaints against Dr. Jabbar, so this is definitely something I could look more into. As mentioned, there are celebrities or people in the media media who too have gotten these operations performed, including Theresia Fischer, a model, reality TV star, and Instagram influencer born in Hamburg, Germany. Theresia was 5 foot 5 inches tall before getting multiple surgeries on both her femurs and tibias. These operations caused her to gain a full 5.5 inches in height, allowing her to be nearly 6 feet tall. She began these operations when she was 24 years old in 2016. And in the summer of 2024, she announced via an Instagram post that she had finished her journey by officially getting 2 extension rods removed, now at age 32. In this post, she described that before getting the surgery, her husband told her he thought she'd look more attractive with longer legs, stating, quote, "He said, if you do this for me, I will always love you and carry you in my arms." With completely lost self-confidence, I threw myself into his wish to lengthen my legs by 14 centimeters. The pain that I endured for 8 years was so enormous, physical and mental, that I cannot even put it into words. And despite her doing this at the prompting of her ex-husband, she and her husband are actually no longer together today. Theresia herself refers to these operations as Frankenstein procedures. While she did spend around $162,000 for the whole ordeal, she came out of it fine with no serious physical complications. However, she did mention more mental healing that she needed to work through. There's also a man named Dynzell Sigers who creates videos sharing his recovery on his Instagram. He's from Chicago, but got this operation done on his tibias in Turkey in 2023 to raise his height from 5'5" to 6 feet. In his videos, he does a lot of exercises and he looks to be doing very well so far. Now, oddly enough, after getting the procedure done, in an interview, Dynzell described, and even reading his comments on Instagram, while there is support, there are still people sending hate to him for getting a procedure like this. For example, in a post from last month in January 2025, one comment reads, quote, "Height surgery has got to be the lamest thing you can have done." And another reads, quote, "Buddy was that insecure." Likewise, when he initially got the surgery, there were even comments stating that they hoped he'd never walk again. Some argue that it's ridiculous for one to risk their health to do something like this, with a comment on a truly YouTube video on Dynzell stating, quote, "It's sad that we live in a world that other people's validation means more than your health." But on the other hand, others bring up the point that it's more than just validation. It's just about being comfortable and confident with oneself. And also, unless you've experienced what it's like to be at a height you're not comfortable with, or unless you've experienced it hurting your self-esteem, it's probably a little bit easier said than done to just say, oh, just be confident with who you are. You also have to be mindful of people who do have body dysmorphia, for example. Not everyone who gets this procedure done has body dysmorphia. But for the ones who do, this is far more complex than just somebody being insecure. At a short height, one is judged for being short. But then when doing surgery to get taller, one is judged for that as well. So it's almost kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't. Overall, limb lengthening surgeries have most definitely progressed from when they started till now, and it continues to progress. While there are concerning risks and complications that can come with this procedure, and while the entire process seems very painful and is very long to say the least, many people who have done it have reported how it has changed their lives for the better, that it has improved their self-esteem and just improved their overall quality of life. So at the end of the day, if it is something somebody is interested in, it truly is just about speaking with doctors, getting the right opinions, and seeing if this is something that would work for you. As with any surgery, it's also extremely important to try going to the right doctor. Many sources have described issues of people even traveling outside of their country to go somewhere cheaper, but then coming back with problems that cost much more to fix than if they went to someone who was more expensive. Of course, as we saw with Elaine's case, however, that doesn't stop the fact that issues can still occur no matter who you go to or how much it costs. And there are obviously successes that do come from going abroad or going to someone cheaper. But these are just concerns, not just with this procedure alone, but any cosmetic surgery in general. It's really just trying to determine if the reward would outweigh the risk, no matter who you're going to. Hopefully, Elaine is able to further heal after this ordeal, and that everyone getting a limb lengthening procedure done, they too can heal and enjoy what they've intended to get out of the surgery. But yes, that is it for this case. What are your thoughts on this story? Do you think this was a case of negligence? Do you think it was just bad luck? Please comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any other videos on medical cases, crime, and mysteries. Bye now.